No bargaining.
All right.
Everything you say will be recorded.
Recorded, so watch your mouth. Watch your language.
Yeah. Were you speaking to me?
No. I mean, it was just in general. We're starting to let these expletives come out.
I was pulling chain a little bit. That's all.
Okay, so let's look at the opening prayers, and we'll just go ahead and go through these in the Tibetan, where there's the Tibetan sing-songy thing with it. Okay, so it's taking refuge and generating bodhicitta, and the what we're talking about today. We've been studying Shantideva is the way of the Bodhisattva, and it's all about bodhicitta, which is this aspiration to improve yourself so much that you reach an enlightened state so that you can benefit all other beings. And that's what bodhicitta is. It means awakened mind and heart. Okay, so this prayer is about taking refuge in the enlightened beings, the bodhisattvas who are on the path to enlightenment, our gurus who have taught us basically everything we know. We wouldn't know this without them. And the realizations that you have along the path. So that's what we're taking, like it's a safe direction, and taking that and then trying to generate this idea of wishing to become enlightened for the benefit of all beings. There we go. Angye chedang soki choknam la jamchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi dagi tinzo ki pesonam ki drola penchir sangye druparsho sangye chedang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi dagi jinzo gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye druparshu sangye chodang soki chodnam la Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi Dagi jinso gipe sonam ki drola benchir sangye druparso. And then we'll say these four immeasurable thoughts.
Hey, I just wanted to mention that Geshe sent Christopher a message that instead of what we say is chinyan during that.
I'm saying jinsok, which means.
And he says, we're from studying the Dharma, and his is from teaching the Dharma.
Yeah.
So that's
He
why
told me
he
to
said-
say jinsok.
I figured it was something.
That's what we
An
used
email, I
to say.
sent him a voicemail message.
He did, and the little kid, Kashy
God.
Robson was like
yeah,
laughing
right.
in the background. It was pretty cute. Okay, we're four measurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. So this goes for the wasps and the raccoons and the foxes and the cats and the ants and everything. Okay, well, now I'll go on to the top of the next page. It's called the 7 limb prayer, or there's 7 branches to this prayer. Here what we're doing is visualizing our teachers, Buddhas, all of the Bodhisattvas in the space in front of us, and we are making these prayers to them. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And then finally, the mandala offering. And what we're doing with this prayer is, in our own way, visualizing what we think a perfect world, a perfect universe would be like, where everything is working in a very healthy and wholesome, interdependent way and in harmony. And just imagine that, however you imagine that, and then picture it as a beautiful mandala that you're offering to the Buddhas and the gurus and the Bodhisattvas that are in the space in front of us. Sajiperki Jukshime Tramri Rablingji Nidegen Padi Sangye Jindu Midewaki Drokun Andachina Chapasho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam. And our teacher, our current teacher who lives in India, this is Geshe Nima, the second from the right. He has asked that before we have any discussions as a group about the nature of reality, that we read these two prayers. One is called the Essence of Causation mantra, which is an ancient Sanskrit mantra which describes how the Buddha said all things arise depending on other causes and conditions, and that there is a way out of suffering. Suffering arises from causes and conditions, and there is a pathway that you can remove that suffering and achieve true and a complete happiness and enlightenment. So that's what that prayer that says Ye Dhamma Hetu is about. And then the next one, stanza 5 from the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna, talks about we'll see when we read it. Okay. So here we go. Ye Dhamma Hetu. Om Ye Dhamma Hetu Prabhava. Hetu Tesham Tathagato Yavadat. Tesham Cha Yo Nirodha. Evam Badi Mahashramanana Swaha. And then from Nagarjuna. By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconception, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. And emptiness is the topic today. And no problem, come on in. There are some folding chairs, right? Yeah. Emptiness refers to the actual fact that there is no phenomenon that exists that does not depend on other causes and conditions. Therefore, all phenomena are empty of existing from their own side, existing inherently, existing independently and self-existing. Because everything, no matter what it is, when you actually analyze it, you can't really find the self-existence of the thing because it's constantly changing and constantly depending on causes and conditions. We're the same way. We don't exist. We don't have any independent self-existence. You can just go back to, our parents were the ones who our body came from. We didn't do that. Our mind is constantly growing and changing. So there's all kinds of things that are affecting us. And so emptiness is just referring to that fact that nothing exists independently from its own side, self-existing. But it can be kind of we actually don't see things that way. The way when we look out and see everything, we see everything as existing separate and distinct and kind of existing from its own side. And so we have a view of things that doesn't actually match how they actually exist. So this is what emptiness, the cultivation of emptiness is about that. And according to the Buddha, if one can actually have a direct non-conceptual realization of emptiness, then one can be completely liberated from all suffering. So that's something to shoot for. Okay. Last time we didn't quite finish, so I'll just do the last part that we didn't cover. We were talking last time about illusion versus reality. And we talked about the difference between inherent existence and the reality of emptiness. We talked about how things appear as opposed to how they exist, like I was just saying. We talked about the way worldly people, kind of like us, view things, and the way advanced yogis, like the guy who was here last night, and the people that Sean was talking about, his teachers, the advanced yogis, the guy who was here interpreting what the Geshe was saying, had a teacher who he lived. Sean lived in the redwoods in California, and his teacher was in India. And his teacher called him on the phone, and she and Sean were talking. And his teacher said, "Oh, your aunt wants to see you." And he said, "Wait a minute, my aunt isn't even grandmother. My grandmother isn't here. She's out. She's gone to the store. She won't be back for an hour." He says, "No. She's standing in front of a white door next to a black dog." And the guy freaked out because he knew exactly that they had a black dog and they had a white door. So he went and he found his aunt and grandmother. And his teacher on the phone said, "Put her on the phone. I want to talk to her."
Puts everything into doubt when you can't get the.
Well, no. Well, keep correcting me if I'm wrong. But he said,
No problem.
Yeah, what happened?
"Yeah, no problem. I know it's a joy." So he gave the phone to his grandmother, and all of a sudden his grandmother and his teacher were having a conversation, but his teacher didn't speak English and his grandmother didn't speak Tibetan. So he kind of just said, "This is something I don't even understand." So the point being, there's a way that all of us worldly people experience and view things, and there's a way that highly advanced yogis can actually cut through a lot of the mirage of the way we think things exist and can just directly connect. So and that's just a current day example
Telepath communicating
I-
to California.
in changing languages and being understood.
Yeah.
That's wild, right?
Yeah.
Then we talked about illusion-like beings versus actual illusions or illusory beings. And according to the Buddha, the way we appear to one another, or the way a dog or a cat or the wasp, it's illusion-like in that our mind projects onto all beings a sort of a concrete, independently existing appearance. But that's illusion-like because that's not actually the way anything exists. Not independently, not inherently from its own side. So the Buddha is saying the way we normally perceive things, it's illusion-like. But there's a difference between illusion-like and actual illusions. And the examples I was using last week were they have these really cool what do they call them? Drone light holograms. So what they have all these drones that be like out on a big soccer field or something, and they'll have all these drones laid out there, and they're different colored lights, and then they're programmed somehow to fly up into the air, and then they form all of these 3D things like flying dragons that fly through the city skyline and flying whales, and I mean just all kinds of things. It's like, okay, that's an actual illusion. It's an illusion, even though it looks like a real thing up there. You go, no, that's not a real thing. As opposed to we're actually consciousnesses. We exist, but we don't exist the way we kind of appear. It's a little like the Course in Miracles. Yeah. How did the Course in Miracles put it? Everything
I have given everything I see all the meaning that it has.
That was the very first lesson. I have given everything I see all the meaning that it has for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. These people, they saw that we had Course in Miracles, which Kavita and I were into
Yeah.
in the 70s or something. I mean, early on, or very early on. Yeah, we were young. And they also were.
There was a point.
It wasn't, right. Yes, there was a time when I was young. All right, so basically, the Buddha says that the mind, you can't cause a mind to exist. Like you can't make a holographic image. You can't do anything that can actually give it consciousness. And there's a discussion going on now about AI, and is it possible? And so we shall see, but I actually think it's probably not possible, because it has to be, everything has to be programmed, and then it has to be programmed to be ethical. And, so there's no actual,
It's a theoretical.
it's a
thing.
theoretical thing.
And so it's hard to say.
It's very difficult to say. Very, very difficult to say. I remember Alexander Berzin once said it could be possible that if AI became an appropriate vehicle for an actual consciousness to enter into, then maybe that could work. Yeah. So I don't know. Who knows?
No, we shouldn't.
No, because there's really not a really good answer right now. So yeah. So anyways, so what the Buddha says is that the cause of a mind has to be a previous moment of a mind. It has to be, and mind and consciousness are synonymous in Buddhism. So what causes consciousness is a previous moment of itself. So what that means is that you can just keep tracing back and back and back and back. And the Buddha says there is no beginning to consciousness and there is no ending to consciousness. It is a eternal thing that runs both ways, time-ways. And so that's what causes a mind to exist, not some kind of formula or mathematical equation or things like that. According to the Buddha. So we were on this last thing, different causes, different effects appear. So where Shantideva then continues, this is the 9th chapter, which is the wisdom chapter of Shantideva, which last night Geshe Tsoknyi was saying is the most difficult and the most important. That all the other chapters of the Bodhisattva way are leading up to this wisdom chapter. And I agree with it. It's the most difficult.
Yeah.
So Shantideva continues with stanza 13 of chapter 9. A single cause for everything there never was. If ultimately beings are in nirvana, you will say, but relatively circle in samsara, circle in cyclic existence, even Buddhahood would revert to the samsaric state. So why, you ask, pursue the Bodhisattva path? As long as there's no cutting of the causal stream, there's no halting even of illusory displays. And I was so happy last night that Sean said, it's like the way of the Bodhisattva is written in code.
Yes, I picked up on that.
Because you read something like that and you go, what does that actually say? So there are a whole bunch of commentaries that exist, and I have some of them. And Geshe Nima asked me to, go through this and explain it in a way that we can understand it. So based on the commentaries, here's the explanation of what that just said. The Prasangikas, which is there are various schools of what they call Buddhist tenets. There are two schools that are that belong to Mahayana Buddhism, which is the great vehicle, which is meaning you're taking the Buddhist path all the way to enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And then there are two Theravada schools, tenets of Buddhism, which are not the great vehicle, but they are about attaining, reaching a state of nirvana for yourself, so that you can just be released from this seemingly endless cycle of birth, aging, sickness, death, birth, aging, sickness, death, and just, the suffering that goes along with the kind of experience that we see in the world, this cyclic existence. So the Prasangikas are the highest of the high level schools. And the way they explain the Buddhist teaching, particularly about the nature of reality, emptiness, has not yet been able to be disputed by the lower schools. So the Prasangikas say that there doesn't exist a single cause that is capable of giving rise to a variety of different results. Nowhere in the universe is there one cause capable of producing all the effects that exist outside the mind or within the mind. So just think about that. I mean, the thing that immediately popped to my mind is, I was raised Catholic, and so I was told that God was the cause of everything. And of course, there's God is beginningless, God is endless. It's similar to consciousness. But the Buddha is saying there's no one cause that can cause all the variety of things that exist within a mind or without a mind. So it would be like if, say, there's a mass murderer, right? And they have in their mind that they're going to, blow up a building full of people. Well, you can't really say that God caused that. Because God wouldn't have said, I'm going to create these minds that want to destroy things. That doesn't sound like what they say God is. God is more like everything is working perfectly the way it should be, that God is perfect. So the idea that there was one thing that could create something that would go bad, a perfect thing that could create something that would go awry and wrong, screwed up and mixed up. Prasangikas are saying there is no one cause that can do that. We basically, each one of us, with our beginningless and endless continuum of consciousness, are the ones who are the cause of what we experience and how we think. We're the ones who do it. It's basically, as Venerable Rubina says, the Australian nun, she says, we're the boss. According to the Buddha, we're the boss. We're the ones who are making it all happen. So that's a very different view, and it needs to be thought about carefully. So from different causes, different effects appear, but they aren't different from each other according to whether their existence is real or illusory. It's like the apparitions of dragons and whales produced through the technological wizardry of drone light shows. You might perceive a difference between them according to whether they have wings and a tail, or fins and a flipper, but there's no difference in terms of them being an illusion. Whether they're real or illusory, that they're illusion. The lower schools who are called in this discussion, they're called the realists. So we're talking here about the two lower Theravada schools who don't posit this idea of emptiness and going all the way, reaching Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. They're positing the idea that you can attain nirvana, which would be just a cessation of, nirvana just means blowing out, or means cessation in Sanskrit. As if you blew out this whole cyclic existence thing and were free of it. That's what the Theravadins would say nirvana is.
But even that nirvana is temporary. I mean, it might go on for eons and eons, but eventually you burn off all that good karma, and then you're literally back to square one, and you gotta start all over.
That's right. If you actually don't have the realization of emptiness, and you don't develop unshakable ethics, almost as if your ethics were like a vow that you had, that you would never, ever, ever harm, which is why I don't want to kill the wasps. They've got wasps in the cabin.
Oh, no.
Well,
Yesterday we had lots of
lots.
Yeah.
I got at least 9 or 10 of them, and I don't know how many you got. But I really would prefer not to kill them. And they're not aggressive.
Right.
I think of them as my little wasp friends. But
Right.
anyway.
Could you call your friends home?
Come to Papa. Okay, so the realists, they hold the belief that nirvana is a real entity, it's a real thing. And they take issue with the Prasangikas who deny that things exist inherently, that things have any kind of independent self-existence. The lower schools say, no, they do. Nirvana has an independent self-existence, all its own. So the realists say that if nirvana is not truly existent, but samsara exists conventionally, samsara exists like conventionally, it's an appearance like this. They're saying so then the Buddha must be in samsara because nirvana doesn't exist. Because the lower schools do not get the concept. The lower schools don't get the concept that inherent existence doesn't mean non-existence. That to say nothing exists independently from its own side is not saying that it doesn't exist. It's saying that it doesn't exist independently from its own side.
Right.
But it still exists. But the lower schools get caught up in this, and so do we. So do we. I mean, it's sort of like our default mode.
But you could also say that a Bodhisattva or Buddha, or even an enlightened being, continues to exist in samsara.
Yes, of course. And we're going to say this. Yeah, but
Wait, let Brian finish his
Mhm.
thought.
So the point is that because a entity has become enlightened, they exist in samsara but are not affected or I'm not sure what they're captured or
they're not captured. They're not
they're
captured.
captured by the same things that we do, but they still exist cyclically in samsara because they continue to come back to help others.
This is by their choice.
By their choice, but they
It's-
still,
It's through their compassion, actually,
Right, I get
that
it, I get
that they will.
Choose to come
but
back.
this idea of nirvana and enlightenment and everything is in the highest school is actually you commit to repeating.
Yeah.
your-
It's all a state of mind.
Right, it's all a state of mind.
Yeah, it's all a state of mind. It's not
You
a.
could almost put the analogy of nirvana would be like deciding to just go hang out in a resort and.
Well, I'll tell you what the Prasangikas say. So the realists are saying, if these things don't exist, what's the point of actually practicing the Bodhisattva path? Because they don't understand that what inherent existence is referring to. The Prasangikas respond to this by saying that all phenomena exist both conventionally and ultimately. This is what we were talking about last night. And you left before, you guys left before he described it a little bit further. The way Sean was describing it, he was making it seem as if these highly realized teachers and beings, they have one way that they appear to us, but ultimately they have all of these incredible.
But even that appearance is
But it's all a dependent.
right.
Right, it's all dependent. The reason that those highly realized bodhisattvas are highly realized is that they did the work. They created the causes and conditions to get there. So when we're talking about conventional existence and ultimate existence, everything exists that way. For instance, these glasses here exist both conventionally, the way they appear as glasses, and they exist ultimately meaning that they have no independent self-existence. They are empty of independent self-existence. So ultimate reality always refers to this concept of emptiness, that nothing exists independently nothing is independently self-existent. That is the ultimate reality of everything. And the conventional reality is the way things appear.
And the lower schools don't, so here's a question about that. So someone that is really enmeshed, and that's their belief in the lower schools, looking at dependent arising, and that mind state create a state where they are independent. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, they've created a reality.
So if a Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha are in this nirvana, can they actually create independent self-existence?
Yes,
can-
I'm just.
No.
No, because according to the Buddha, that's not the nature of
One way
reality.
to say is that would be an impossible way of existing.
Yeah, however, we try to do that all the time. We do that all the time in this world. You know, we think everything is existing independently. Our car exists independent. I mean, that's the way we are, and this is what causes all our problems.
You know, it's
This
really,
is why we get
it's a very
upset.
mundane example, but last couple days ago, I put up many blinds and curtains. And when I look at it, it's like, I know I did it intellectually, but I look at it and go, oh, there's a window with many blinds on your curtain. It's like, as if it was always, it's really weird.
It's like some permanent thing.
I wanted to mention something, and I think sometimes the words transporting to English can. They have other implications in our normal usage, and one of the words looks like that is ultimate. And what I think we tend to think is it's ultimate as in the very best, you know, the highest. And what actually they're pointing to is that if you analyze something and you debate back and forth, for example, that glass table is made of glass, it goes through this process with sand and fire, and you know, there's this whole process for making glass. And so glass is empty of, you know, existing from its own side. But as you go further and further into, well, the atomic particles and this and that, what they're saying ultimate reality is the ultimate conclusion you come to. You cannot go any further than saying, you know, that thing is existing from infinite causes and conditions. And that is its ultimate.
And it's actually constantly changing.
It's ultimate in the sense of there's no other argument about it. There's nothing more you can say.
The
That's
buck
why it's
stops
called
there.
Ultimate.
Yeah.
Not that it's the
Not that-
highest or the best.
Actually, everything exists both conventionally and ultimately at the same time.
And by the way, I mean, just the terminology kind of helps you contemplate. So what I just said about, well, why do they use this term ultimate existence? It's ultimate in the sense of you can't dissect it any further. It's like saying we can't fathom all the causes and conditions that led to us being here in this room. And we know theoretically it's infinite. It's therefore it's empty of it. This room right now with people is empty of existing from its own creation. And if you dissect it, the ultimate conclusion is, wow, this is trippy. And the reason I want to know, so this I forget what they call Prasangika in this argument, the way it's translated, but Prasangika, that word is often translated as consequentials. And what they're pointing to is that things arise as a consequence of causes and conditions. So these, you know, kind of getting more familiar with the terminology sort of helps trigger your thinking about it.
And also as they, I think maybe this was related to your question, Merit, as somebody who is basically, you know, what you call a realist, who thinks that things exist as they appear, concretely, separately, through the Prasangikas, as a consequence of the Prasangikas pointing out to them how dependent arising actually works, they can change their mind about it. We can all change. We can come to a different conclusion as a consequence of understanding that higher view of things. And that's really good news, you know. We're not stuck. In other words, we're not stuck. The Buddha himself says that any conscious being, any being with a consciousness, whether it's Molly or a wasp or the raccoon or you or I, has the potential to become an enlightened being, has the potential through causes and conditions to go all the way to Buddhahood for the benefit of others. So that's saying we have enormous potential. Every being, every conscious being has enormous potential, which is why the more I understand this and realize this, and we have lots of conscious beings on this property, the more I'm feeling connected to them, you know, which is why I don't want to, you know, kill the wasps. So
The challenge, sorry,
I had to get over not wanting to kill.
the
I
challenge,
understand.
with ultimate reality is that we we keep negating the existence of reality to come to the fact that that ultimately it doesn't exist independently. I mean, we're
Well,
negating
not
its existence.
negating reality, negating reality as we think.
We're negating a sort of false
Again,
view of it,
Yeah.
an
that's
erroneous view of
We
it.
don't know what it looks like. We don't know what it is. We don't know how I mean, I was gonna ask him last night, though I was asking too many questions anyways, but. You know, how do you know you're enlightened? How do you know you've achieved enlightenment? How do you know you reached? You know, I mean, what is it?
You don't
if
ask
you-
all these questions.
You know, having not been enlightened, I can't give you an answer.
To your question, what does emptiness look like?
Yeah.
What does emptiness look like? And again, emptiness is a mode of existence. It's not a thing, it's not a noun. If you're gonna say anything, it's, you know, an adjective, it's the mode of existence of things.
Right, but if you go through the heart
So-
sutra,
So, no, but this was, I know what you're, I know hard to, but
I know what you're
what
saying.
you're trying to say is.
This is why this is gonna take
that
7
it's
years.
gonna look like something other than the transitory appearance to your currently available sense consciousnesses.
okay, I agree with that.
That's all they're saying. So whatever array of sense consciousness you have, in whatever realm you find yourself or state of being, you find yourself in this and future experiences. That's what emptiness will look like, because that's what it appears. You're looking at the appearance of things that are empty of inherently existing. It's not a place, it's not a thing, it's this morass of energetic.
Again, what
Infinite
is my mind
possibility.
going to say to me when I achieve in understanding?
It will, you'll go.
Just will.
Science, reached enlightenment.
I don't know if you remember figuring out multiplication.
For what?
Do you remember the experience of figuring out how multiplication
No,
works?
I don't.
Okay. Well, I mean, I barely do it. Robin uses the term, someday the penny just drops and gone.
It's an experience, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys remember the first time you,
You'll know.
you actually, you know, we were learning how to read as little kids, and I remember the first time, it was like what is it, Dick and Jane?
Yeah.
And
But don't worry,
I
Robin.
could see the words, I was learning the words, but then there was a moment where it's like, oh, I understood that the words meant things, and they were putting ideas together, and it's like, I got it. And I remember sort of running around the house telling my parents, I know what it is, I know how to read, I know how to read. So that may be something like when you experience, you know, the penny drops with you, understand actually the nature of reality in all of its diversity. Yeah.
So the life being is a running around going.
Well, true.
Because we're not there.
So is the idea that, so there's this undifferentiated whole, and that the path to get to that level of awareness of that is the emptiness, going along with the sort of thinking of the emptiness as a verb? And so if you see yourself as a isolated consciousness, to open up that consciousness to that undifferentiation, the path is to surrender yourself, or surrender the sort of the accretion of thoughts or whatever that kind of prevent that. And so the verb being like, okay, well, how do you get rid of that? The barriers is through embracing emptiness. Is that the idea?
I think the Buddha wouldn't use the word surrender in that way. I think the Buddha would say it's through the development of our awareness of step by step, gradually, how things actually are interconnected, how things actually do exist and dependently arise and are constantly changing, even though we can't see the change occur, you know, moment to moment, but that things are changing moment to moment. So as you learn these concepts, you take them on board, you think about them, you come to a conclusion logically through your logic reasoning that this actually makes sense. You gradually, step by step, develop on this path that leads you to a much bigger awareness of how things exist, which in some ways you could say consciousness is completely all interconnected, like the ocean is just one big ocean, and yet, I think we were talking about this last week.
yeah.
You can pull a drop out of that ocean, and that's part of that whole big thing. So consciousness is connected. We are an interdependent kind of thing, and yet we do have, you could say, an individual aspect to it, but we're all part of one larger thing. So it's not like one big whole thing. It's a whole thing that's made of many interdependent parts.
Mhm.
You know, it's kind of like, oh, go ahead.
My question, I'm sure you're gonna have an
Okay.
answer, and it won't take 7 years. Is that this, going back to the statement of there's no single cause of varying.
There's no one cause,
There's
I
no
think,
one
yeah.
cause of all these experiences or expressions. So, but couldn't you say, I mean, that if everything that exists is of mind, I mean, that it's like, is the cause of everything mind or consciousness? I mean, it's like and it's probably just semantics, but if everything
Yes.
that exists is ultimately, everything that exists is an expression of consciousness.
You know
which is
that
the same
same
as
I think
mind.
Muktananda,
So it's not the cause
the
of.
play of consciousness. Have you heard that term? I think Muktananda and some of the Hindu guys use the play of consciousness.
Okay.
I think that would be an accurate. I mean, sorry, I should shut up.
Anyway,
I turn the camera away from you.
Because of everything.
It's probably the marriage.
Yeah.
But you don't go outside like two minds to look at how it cut, because it's inherent in everything, but.
Yeah, however, you have to go back to this idea of conventional reality and ultimate reality. So in other words, these things actually exist. They exist conventionally. They exist conventionally. Ultimately, they are completely interconnected and interdependent and completely impermanent, changing moment by moment by moment by moment. And there is no consciousness in this except for the tiny microscopic beings that are living in it that have a consciousness, have awareness. But my glass is here.
Sharing that with you.
You're welcome. Just thought you'd like to know that, guys.
Most of it is mine.
Maybe. Let's see. I mean, because we haven't finished this chapter yet. I believe it's getting there. Okay.
This is just a recap.
We haven't even finished the recap. Like I
It
said,
happened all the time.
and like I said, it doesn't matter if this takes 10 years. It'd be the whole point, as Geshe said, was to understand it.
Right.
Just don't skim over it and go through it. Really, we need to understand it. Yeah.
Chapter 2 done, chapter 3.
All right. Take that off. And this is the most difficult chapter and the most important one. All right. So the Prasangikas say all phenomena exist both conventionally and ultimately, and both arise and occur together at the same time. So right now, we're all existing conventionally as we appear, and ultimately as not existing and not having any independent self-existence. So is everything else in the book. Ultimately, all phenomena, including nirvana, including samsara, and sentient beings, are utterly empty or devoid of any kind of true, inherent, independent self-existence. Conventionally, all phenomena, including nirvana, including samsara, and sentient beings, are dependent arisings resulting from causes and conditions. As long as the continuum of causes and conditions for any phenomenon is not cut or severed, that phenomenon will not cease. Even if it's an illusory, even if it's an illusion. So in other words, as long as the power and the computer programming for these drone holograms is going, those drone holograms are going to keep going. They're not going to stop. It's when the power's shut off, the program's turned off, the drones will just fall. So as long as the causes and conditions exist for anything, it will keep going. Once the continuum of are, they say delusions. So delusions are our erroneous, mistaken way of perceiving everything. And because of that erroneous, mistaken way that we perceive everything, like things exist inherently from their own side, we develop what Buddhism calls delusions. And these are based on our ignorance of how things exist. We develop attachment for things. We grasp onto things as if they existed inherently. And the ones that look really good to us, like the M&Ms there, we really want those M&Ms. And I don't really care so much about, the little key lights, but, that's just an example. So we develop attachment. It could be we develop an attachment for a person or a particular type of food or whatever it may be. And once that attachment is blocked by something, then we develop some kind of aversion. It's either anger, or it's going to be something like fear, or dissatisfaction, or depression, or there's a whole gamut of the things that arise when our attachment doesn't get what it wants, when it's blocked. And this occurs in relationships all the time. We think, we think we have entered into a relationship with one kind of person, spend some time with them, and realize, oh, they're not what I was projecting onto them as being. There's something different going on there. And either we accept that and grow with that and grow into that, or the relationship's over. Because so these are the delusions, the attachment, the aversion, and the ignorance that's at the base of them. So once the continuum of delusions is severed, once that's gone, once we've actually had, basically the root of these delusions is ignorance of the way things actually exist, which is why it is so essential to understand emptiness, to understand the nature of reality, to understand what's going on. Once that continuum of delusions is severed, the delusions will cease. So samsara won't occur, even conventionally. If every single being, and there are an infinite number of them, ceased the continuum of their delusions, samsara would just not exist, period. It wouldn't exist ultimately or conventionally. It just wouldn't even exist, because the causes for it wouldn't exist. So samsara keeps going because the causes for it exist. And each one of us have created our own causes to keep going over and over, cycling through samsara. So it's one person by one person, one at a time. Each one of us has to, for ourselves, sever those causes, undo that. Remember in the Course in Miracles that was talking, talks a lot about stuff like this. And it says there's a whole process of undoing that you have to go through in order to actually get there. So we have to sort of analyze the way we think, the way things are mistaken, the false and erroneous way we project onto things, the way we think they exist. We have to analyze that. And then we have to look sort of beyond that and see what is the actual nature of the reality that's going on here. And by doing that, and it's a gradual process, but by doing that, combined with cleaning up our ethics, because if we don't clean up our ethics, our minds are going to be disturbed. All those delusions that I was talking about, the attachment, the anger, the antidote for those is to clean up your ethics, to understand and why you're cleaning up those ethics. Because you want to be of benefit. You want the whole thing to work, not just for yourself, but for everybody who you're connected to. So it's a whole process you have to go through, but it can be done. It can be done, and it's gradual. Who said it?
I mean, I think
You have to take a really long view of this.
Yeah, right. That was Geshe Drakpa's last bit of advice.
I think Robina says the same thing. You have to take a long view of this.
So it's helpful and encouraging to also notice that you can make these little teeny tiny incremental changes. And so, for example, by adopting this view of how things exist, when difficult things happen, one of the first things I noticed myself is it's much easier to drop the, why is this happening to me? You know, if you get hit by a car or say you get rear-ended. Well, you don't, I mean, the immediate benefit as you start to really sincerely take this view of interdependence on board is you don't immediately rush to the, how dare that guy rear-end me? Because at a very simplistic level, you quickly recognize there are all these causes and conditions, all these things going on with him and how you were driving and how he was driving and all the other cars around and the time of day and all these things. It's not like he was looking for you to crash into you. And so the immediate incremental benefit is you drop the negative emotions that come around when shit like that happens. And you get used to operating in that way. And then once you get comfortable with that kind of letting go, basically your world and the web that you see of interconnectedness gets larger and larger and larger until ultimately enlightenment. But it's important to be encouraged by the immediate benefits of broadening your acceptance of interdependence and causes and conditions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I think one of the very first things I noticed about myself, as my mind began to change through my understanding of everything, karma, everything the Buddhism talks about, and of course miracles as well, early on. What I noticed happened, the first thing that changed is that I stopped calling other drivers on the road that I didn't like what they were doing. I stopped calling them assholes. I stopped thinking of them. I stopped thinking of them as being jerks. I mean, and I realized, wow, something has changed in me because I'm not doing that anymore. And so that's what Kabir is talking about, these little incremental changes in you, and I still don't now, to this day.
That's enlightened for me.
That's the first step to enlightenment. Don't call a driver an asshole.
Right.
That's a good place to start. I mean, we all know this. We all know what it's like. I mean, we all know how angry we can get, or other drivers can get. It's scary.
Well, they're just a whole
Road rage.
out there.
Yeah. There's more and more and more every day. Anyway, so those little incremental.
I mean, the sphere, if you will, the amount of the size of the sphere as we go towards enlightenment gets larger and
It's
larger.
infinite.
Until we're ultimately, they say, omniscient.
Yeah. So once the continuum of delusions that cause samsara is severed, samsara will not exist. Okay, so it'll so the Buddha has done this. So the Buddha has therefore attained nirvana. So what's nirvana? Okay, I talked about it initially. Nirvana is a cessation of the activities of the deluded worldly mind and its related suffering. Normally, when we think nirvana, we think it's this really nice place where you get exactly the kind of latte you want. I mean, I think they're even
The utopia.
yeah, it's like nirvana. It's just the best. But what nirvana actually is, as I said before, it's the Sanskrit root means to blow out, like you're blowing out a candle. It's a cessation. So nirvana is a cessation of the activities of the deluded worldly mind and its related suffering. It marks the release or liberation from worldly suffering and uncontrollable rebirths in cyclic existence. Liberation from cyclic existence is achieved through a direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness. That's how liberation is achieved. Thus, a being who has had a direct realization of emptiness could abide simultaneously in the world and yet be liberated from worldly suffering and the uncontrollable rebirths in cyclic existence. So this raises the question, which you've already raised and answered, as to whether a Buddha is in the cycle of samsaric existence. A Buddha has gained release from cyclic existence. But according to Mahayana Buddhism, that doesn't imply that such a being no longer takes birth in the world. A Buddha does not take birth due to the forces of uncontrolled delusions and negative karma, a Buddha takes birth in the world due to their compassion in order to lead sentient beings to spiritual awakening. And that is the point of practicing the Bodhisattva way of life. That's the point. That is the whole point, that we can become enlightened ourselves, cease all of this uncontrollable cycling around in samsara and all the suffering, yet be in this world to help others. And isn't that what our teachers do?
Mhm,
I mean, isn't that what they do? Isn't that what His Holiness the Dalai Lama is doing?
right.
Isn't that what anybody from any good person who's really helping other people, isn't that what they're doing?
Mhm.
So this
Yeah.
brings up another question in my mind. We're on number 14 now for the Dalai Lama.
Yes, the 14th Dalai Lama, yeah.
Let's say that each one lives 100 years.
Mhm.
That's 1400 years. Buddha was 2500 years ago.
Mhm.
So who picked the first Dalai Lama? Where did that person come from? What's the reincarnation of that individual at that time?
The first person labeled Dalai Lama, my recollection is he was a Mongolian. And the king of Mongol gave him the name Dalai Lama, which means ocean of wisdom.
Right, so I think that's true. So a king picked
so
the
he
first
just-
one.
So
That-
somebody
yeah.
just saw his great qualities and went, wow, you're something special.
Mhm.
Let's get.
And at that time, it would, of course, if a king said that, then all of the subjects would go, must be true, because the, big
But
leader
the
says,
king doesn't necessarily have the best,
no, not necessarily.
because Buddha was a prince before he became.
The fact that he's labeled Dalai Lama doesn't matter. What matters was that consciousness had taken birth in a way that was quite helpful to sentient beings. And as such, they had committed to staying in samsara and taking rebirth in samsara repeated times. So whether or not he was labeled Dalai Lama or not doesn't matter.
Well, that's maybe
That's-
true, but there's still 1,000 years in between Buddha and the recognition of this.
Yeah, it's irrelevant though. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I mean, it's like we were
I
saying,
mean,
as long as the
why does it matter
causes,
to you?
as long as the causes for a Dalai Lama exist, there'll still be Dalai Lamas. When the causes cease, there won't be Dalai Lamas, but it doesn't mean there's not going to be.
So this is.
Beings that are here
The
to
fact
help.
that we have a Dalai Lama isn't. I don't want to say
You know what?
that.
It's a conventionality. Dalai Lama is a conventional.
Well, I wanted
Yeah.
to hear what Brian was gonna say.
No, I mean,
You can turn the camera away from me.
no.
It's not gonna
Put
work.
it on Ryan.
No. So the Dalai Lama, the term Dalai Lama is basically I was gonna say an accident, but nothing is an accident, so I can't say it's an accident.
No, it arose due to causes and conditions. For instance, this king saw somebody who had these great qualities and labeled this person as an ocean of great qualities. It's, there's a reason behind it. There's a cause always. It just doesn't pop out like the wasp seem to. There's a cause. They're getting in somehow.
I believe it.
Here's an example, Brian. Let's say you do something so remarkable. In this lifetime, they go, wow, let's call him
Science Drakpa.
science doctor. And then, your deeds and everything are so admirable that when you pass away, all of your devotees go, let's find science doctor and identify his reincarnation, because if we cultivate him at a young age, he'll even be a better science.
More you could do, right?
Yeah.
So then
Well, it
they
is
call him the
just a name.
second science doctor,
Right.
and you
It's
get
just
reborn
labeled, it's
again,
just not,
and they keep working really hard to find.
which is really our construct.
Right,
So then why is Buddha Shakyamuni kind of seen as the critical Buddha versus?
Well, he's the critical Buddha for our eon. They're saying there were Buddhas
Yeah,
before
right,
that,
right,
yeah.
that's right.
But for our particular, if you want to say age, he's the Buddha, the Buddha of this particular age. There will be another one coming where they say it's Maitreya Buddha, I don't know. For, a different age down the road.
Mhm.
Causes and conditions and arisings and.
Science doctor two, the second
Yeah.
science doctor.
Yeah.
We'll be
All
looking
in
for
caps
you.
then, right?
Yeah, we'll be looking for you, dear.
Okay, so now we'll be searching for you. Okay, so now we're going to today's topic. For today's,
We've got half an hour.
this is worse than last week, right? Okay,
But there is no hurry.
there is no hurry, it's as long as it takes. So now we're on what I'm labeling as part 5. These labels aren't in the book, but part 5, and this is I've titled it, does everything exist in the mind only? Does everything exist in the mind only? And this is because now Shantideva has moved up a step. He's moved away from having this kind of dialectic debate with the Theravadan schools, and he's now moving up to the other Mahayana school, which is called Chittamatra, which means mind only. The Chittamatras believe or posit or assert that everything is nothing other than an appearance to the mind. In other words, all the things that we think are out there in this room, it's all just happening in our mind. So now there's going to be a discourse between the Prasangika highest view and the Chittamatra, which means mind only. So the Chittamatrans and the Prasangikas are going to have a little debate about who's right. And what I would say is, this is a really important debate because the Prasangikas, the Chittamatra school is very, very close to the Prasangika school. There's some essential differences that need to just be let go of, but it's really helpful to see the fine differences between these two schools to gain a clearer understanding of the correct view, the Buddhist correct view.
So what do you think is the correct? I mean, your personal thought.
My personal thought?
Yeah.
I think there's aspects of the mind only that are correct.
By the way, Prasangika doesn't refute lock, stock, and barrel mind only.
No, it doesn't.
What they're basically saying is mind basis of all is your problem.
That's what
Okay, yeah, that's what you're about.
it doesn't actually help to just say that, because you have to your own self go through the steps and logically reason out why that is so.
The reason that I mentioned this is when this first came up for us so many years ago, I assumed incorrectly that each school's view was entirely incorrect. So you have, so everything that Sautrantika said is wrong, everything that Vaibhashika
Right.
said is wrong, everything that Chittamatra said is wrong. And actually they expand on each other.
That's because we live in a culture where we think the best thing is the correct one.
Right, this is why I'm
And what we need to see this is a natural progression that we all go through.
it's sort of that expanding.
Yeah.
It's an evolution.
Evolution.
Say
It's an evolution of.
Our ability to grasp.
Mhm,
mhm.
God, that's a science term. Geez.
Our species is evolving,
That's right.
but.
And also aspects are devolving. So things evolve and they devolve, and it really, it depends on whether or not the causes and conditions exist for it to evolve or devolve. Which is kind of an interesting. So they say that the Buddhists say this, the whole universe, you could say, goes in cycles. Okay. Here's stanza 15 of 160 something in this chapter. So this is Chittamatra versus Prasangika.